Okay, so now that we've learned the four different types of sentences: simple sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences, and compound complex sentences, I'd like to go over a few ways that you can vary your sentences without having to use dependent and independent clauses. And we can understand these groups of words as phrases. Now, clauses and phrases are similar, but phrases don't have a subject and a verb, right? There's not something performing something else. There might be a subject, there might be a verb, but they're not together. That would be a clause, and phrases are not clauses. A good definition might be this: they are a grouping of related words that add to a sentence and help create variation and express richness. Okay, so when I talk about sentence variation, when I talk about the transmission of knowledge or information or writing that is engaging your reader, writing with your reader in mind, phrases can be very, very helpful, not only in connecting ideas and transmitting knowledge or information, but in just being good writing that's fun to read, that isn't painful. All right, so that's writing for your reader in mind. So a phrase might look something like this: before you leave, grab your keys. Okay, so the independent clause here is grab your keys. The understood subject is you. Okay, so I've added before you leave. All right, so he ran through the forest, jumping over logs along the way. Jumping over logs along the way is a phrase. An easier learning experience: most people begin driving automatic vehicles rather than manuals. Okay, so that is a sentence. Most people begin driving automatic vehicles rather than manuals with what's called an absolute phrase: an easier learning experience. Okay, so those are just examples. Now there are 8 types of phrases. There are noun phrases, verb phrases, gerund phrases. I'm not going to go over those with you in this video. We are going to have a series of 2 lessons that cover the remaining 5 phrases. So in that first lesson, I'll cover prepositional phrases, infinitive phrases, and participle phrases, sometimes called participial phrases. And then in the next lesson on phrases, I'll cover absolute phrases and appositive phrases. Okay, so I'm going to continue on in this video covering prepositional, infinitive, and participle phrases. All right, so phrase number 1, the prepositional phrase. So of course a prepositional phrase begins with a preposition, right? So no surprise there. And it's going to end with a noun or a pronoun, which is known as the object of the preposition. Once again, though, it's not imperative that you know all of the jargon. I really want you to be able to employ these concepts in your writing as they allow for variation and an engaged reader. All right, so prepositional phrases act as modifiers, right? So they either tell us something more about the noun, or they tell us when or where or how something's being performed, which would act as an adverb. Okay, so they basically modify some part of the sentence. Okay, so here's an example. Beneath the wispy leaves of the elm tree sits a tired dog. And there's actually 2 prepositional phrases here. We have beneath the wispy leaves, and I know that that's one because it starts with a preposition and then it ends with a noun, right? The object of the preposition. Beneath what? Oh, beneath the wispy leaves. And then the next one starts with the preposition of, and then ends with tree, the object of the preposition, of the elm tree. And both of those talk about, both of those modify where the dog is sitting, right? So beneath the wispy leaves of the elm tree sits a tired dog. All right, so that is basically how you'd use a prepositional phrase. Here's another one. The frog sits on top of the log. The frog sits would be the independent clause, right? I could put a period there. On top of the log is the combination of prepositional phrases there. On top is one, and then of the log is the next. We speak with prepositional phrases every day. Just conversational English, we use these. It's implicit knowledge. We don't know what to call them, but as soon as you see them and I give them a vocabulary word like prepositional phrase, you're like, oh, okay, that's what I'm doing. In writing, though, they can be helpful in connecting sentences, showing relationships between things, creating sentence-to-sentence flow, modifying something, creating a mood. They do a lot. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is continue to revise the paragraph about my dog going to the dog park, and I've just included some prepositional phrases which I've highlighted in red. And if you flash back to video 1 and listen to the listen to the paragraph that I wrote, it's really choppy, it's not descriptive, it's not engaging, and hopefully what you've been seeing throughout these videos is that the type of sentence and the addition of phrases can not only make the writing more clear and concise, but also more engaging to read. Okay, so here's what I have. As I sit on the couch, Norman paws the bell on the door. He looks back at me. Beneath his deceptive puppy dog eyes, he's really just a dog with a yearning for the outdoors. This is normal for him. He was never meant to be an apartment dog. My wife and I take him and his brother Puck to the park often. He gets plenty of exercise. He loves to run and retrieve the ball. At the park, he always manages to get wet and smelly. Okay, so I'm going to pause right there and I want to talk about a couple of things. One thing I haven't hit on that maybe I should is comma placement. However, I'm very wary to talk about comma placement because I think it's one of those confounding things to people that just makes us want to go like run off the edge of a cliff. It's mysterious, yet there are rules, yet there are exceptions, and it's just aggravating, and I get it. As a general rule of thumb, if you introduce something with a prepositional phrase, you can include a comma. And as another general rule of thumb, if the phrase itself or the combination of phrases that modifies the independent clause or dependent clause is longer than 5 words, people usually expect you to use a comma. It sort of separates the two parts so that they don't just run together. It helps your reader make sense of things. So as you can see with the first sentence, there are 6 words there, as I sit on the couch, so I included a comma. But if you look at the last sentence, at the park, the rule sort of breaks down. And this is where I think personal preference comes in. I certainly didn't need to include a comma there, but I've gotten into the habit of just using commas with introductory prepositional phrases, but that's not a hard and fast rule. Okay, so those are prepositional phrases. Only 2 more phrases to go. The next one is an infinitive phrase. And the word infinitive is not really something we use a lot. But if you've ever taken a foreign language, especially the Romance languages as they're called, the languages based on Latin, for example, Spanish, then you should have a really good working knowledge of what an infinitive is. For example, comer in Spanish is to eat. So you always define the infinitive of the verb with the word to. Correr, to run. Leer, I think is to read. Okay, so the infinitive is the basic form of a verb, which includes the word to. Now this can get a little tricky because to is also a preposition. So don't get thrown off here. So an infinitive phrase is to plus a verb, and then maybe even some other words. So to run, to eat, to tremble, to peregrinate, which means to walk around. So there's a whole host of infinitive phrases, right? Because there are just countless verbs in the English language. So here are some examples of how infinitive phrases work and how they form different parts of sentences. So to understand infinitive phrases, students must practice. So they are the independent clauses students must practice. I've added an introductory infinitive phrase that modifies that independent clause. So to understand would be the verb. And then to understand infinitive phrases would be the infinitive phrase. Okay, so here's another example of an infinitive phrase. The sentence reads, he plans to make amends with his long-lost friend. All right, so he plans is actually an independent clause, right? He, subject, plans, verb, that's a complete idea. He plans, as silly as it sounds. To make amends is an infinitive phrase. So to make is a verb form, right? And then with his long-lost friend would be a prepositional phrase, but we're focusing on infinitive phrases right now. And lastly, I decided to steal the bottle of ketchup. Okay, so you can see how infinitive phrases work. It might seem silly that I'm going over this because it seems very obvious. It seems very elementary. These are things that we use in everyday speech. However, I think they can become really, really useful when you're revising for sentence variation or pacing or to provide information more clearly. All right, so here is that gripping tale from video 1 about my dog going to the dog park. And here are the revisions I made to add infinitive phrases. So if you look at the first two sentences, Norman paws the bell on the door. He wants to go out again. Of course, as I've mentioned time and again, there's a relationship there. In the past videos, I've used subordinating conjunctions like since and because to show that relationship. But there are many ways to do this, right? So I've revised it to say, to let me know he wants to go out again. Okay. Norman paws the bell on the door. The other infinitive phrase I have is to pacify him. Okay, so that is also an infinitive phrase. So it's just a good strategy to implement when you want to vary the sentences, when you want to think about different ways to get meaning across. The last phrase we'll be looking at is the participle phrase. A participle is not just a fun word to say, right? It's an ing word or an ed word, but it acts differently when we make them phrases. Okay, so things like running, climbing, fishing, jumping, these are all participles. Jumped. However, we have irregular participles. So when you use the word run, you don't say runned. Go isn't goed. Drive isn't drived. It's driven, went, and ran. So they can be a little tricky because if I just say participle phrases begin with ing or ed words, then you go on a hunt for those and disregard all the irregular parts of our language. And participle phrases, although they look like verbs, act as modifiers. So they act like adjectives or adverbs. So here's an example. Driving hurriedly through the rain, the semi-truck slammed into the bridge. All right, so here I'm modifying how the semi-truck was driving hurriedly through the rain. However, the cool thing about participle phrases is they can go almost anywhere in the sentence. So the semi-truck driving hurriedly through the rain slammed into the bridge. And you could have the semi-truck slammed into the bridge, comma, driving hurriedly through the rain. Although that probably wouldn't be the best choice. All right, here's another one. Smothered in ketchup, the fries glistened in the moonlight. Or the fries, smothered in ketchup, glistened in the moonlight. Or the fries glistened in the moonlight, smothered in ketchup. Okay, I'm not obsessed with ketchup, I promise. It's just a good example. All right, so you can see how participle phrases work there. I've included an ing and an ed version, so you can see both cases. And then I think these are a little bit different because unlike prepositional phrases or infinitive phrases, which are common parts of speech in our everyday sort of conversational lives, participle phrases might not be. If you were telling, someone about your day, like you saw this wreck on the highway, this semi-truck hit a bridge, you wouldn't say, yeah, I was on my way home from work and then driving hurriedly through the rain. The semi-truck slammed into the bridge, right? It just has a really sort of it smacks of writing. You know, it's not necessarily the way that most of us speak every single day. But it makes for good writing. It makes for variation, richness, depth, and engagement. It really helps paint the scene or create a mood. So once again, there is the tale of my dog going to the dog park, and then here are some participle phrases. So, pawing the bell on the door, Norman signals he wants to go out again. This is normal for him. Living mostly in the country, he was never meant to be an apartment dog. My wife and I take him and his brother Puck to the park often, giving him plenty of exercise. He loves to run and retrieve the ball, managing always to get wet and smelly. And what I would like for you to do now is to revise your paragraph from either assignment 1, 2, 3, or 4 to include at least one prepositional phrase, one infinitive phrase, and one participle phrase. Now, you can add more sentences to your paragraph if you need to achieve this objective. However, I want one of each that I just went over. And I want them underlined so that they're easy for me to see. So underline the prepositional, infinitive, and participle phrases that you included. Okay, I hope this was helpful for you. If not, hit rewind or get in touch with me. All right, I'll see you in the next video.